Chapter 25 of Boy the Wandering Dog. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. Boy the Wandering Dog by Marshall Saunders. Chapter 25. The Boy Montmorency. A few days after Sir Edward's adventure, and when he was quite restored to health and ready for more experiences, for he was a most daring, plucky old man, who was a strange arrival in our home, I had been to New York with my dear mistress. She wished to call on some friends on Riverside Drive, and had invited me to go with Amarilla, for she knew I loved motoring. Fortunately, it was not a very cold day, and she took the touring car. I detested the limousine. She was all wrapped up in a big cloak, and Amarilla sat on her lap and kept her warm. I thought that of all the ladies we passed in handsome automobiles, not one had such a dear face as my own mistress. I sat on the seat beside her, and she tucked the rug all around my neck to keep me comfortable. Well, we had a very pleasant afternoon in the city. Amarilla and I did not go into any of the houses, but one lady sent us out some sweet cakes, which were very acceptable, for the cool air had sharpened our appetites. "Amarilla," I whispered in the little dog's ear, "where's the charm of the Drive, of Fifth Avenue, of Broadway? Gone, gone, except as lovely, lively places to visit. No more New York for me." Amarilla trembled and nestled closer against Mrs. Granton. She had always hated a city. How her little face brightened when we were well on the broad road leading to Pleasant River. How much we both loved that big house and the dear people who lived in it. "Amarilla," I said, "if our family moved back to New York, would you come too?" She gave a pitiful little squeal, but it was a decided yes. "Suppose they lost their money and had to live downtown, would you stick to them?" At this she struggled to her feet, wagged her bushy little tail, and barked sharply. "Hush, boy," said our mistress, tucking her up again. "You're exciting Amarilla." I persisted and whispered again, "Suppose your Missy," that was what she always called Mrs. Granton, "was poor, and had nothing to eat. Would you go on the stage again to earn some money for her?" Amarilla hesitated one instant. Then she began to howl very gently, very resignedly, but with great determination. She would be willing to make any sacrifices for the woman who had been so good to her. Mrs. Granton was annoyed with me. She knew that we dogs communicated with each other. "Boy," she said irritably, "if you make Amarilla uncomfortable once more, you shall go with Louis." This quieted me. I cuddled up to her, wiggled my body by way of apology, and did not say another word till we got home. I am a great talker, and often keep on when I know I should stop. When Gringo first knew me he called me the Wandering Dog because I had traveled so much, but after a time he called me the Wandering Dog because I told so many stories that hinged on each other. When the car pulled up in our own porte cochere, I followed Amarilla as she ran after her dear Missy to the library. Such a big fire leaped in the chimney, and before it stood Master with George Washington, all dressed up in his white velvet dinner clothes, for he was allowed to come to the table and sit in a high chair with toys before him. He got nothing to eat, of course. He had had his bread and butter supper at 5. Well, in addition to George Washington, there stood on the rug a boy about a year older than George, and Master's face as he surveyed him was a study. He was a kind of a caricature of a petted darling. I understood at once that he was a poor child masquerading as a rich one. I know the poor smell. Somebody had taken great pains with his toilet. He had on a little plush cap with a gilt tassel. His coat was green with gold buttons. His shoes were a pale blue. His little hands were dirty, but his gloves sticking out from his tiny pocket were quite clean. That was so like poor people, to have clean gloves and dirty hands. He seemed to have no handkerchief, and was sniffing violently at intervals. Master was grinning. "Read this, Claudia," he said, handing a slip of paper to mistress, who had sunk into a chair and was examining the child with wondering eyes. "Mr. Granton and Lady," she read aloud. "Dear friends, raise the boy as your own. He is good blood. His name is Montmorency." Mistress looked amazed. "Where did he come from?" she asked. Master shook his head. "I don't know. Bessie says when she was bringing our boy in a short time ago, this child came strolling up the avenue toward them, clutching this piece of paper in his hand. Bessie read it, then ran down the avenue as fast as she could, but there was no one there." "Little boy," said mistress, "where do you come from?" He turned his small, pale, rather intelligent face toward her, and said something that sounded like "Norrish." Mistress looked despairingly at her husband. "What is your mother's name?" she asked. This time he uttered a single syllable that sounded like "Granch." "Da has come home," interrupted little George gleefully. "Why, he doesn't speak as well as our baby," said mistress. "What shall we do about him?" "He's a present, evidently," said master. "George, come here," said mistress, and she took her own child on her lap. Then she went on, "We don't know what sort of a place he's come from." Master pressed the electric button beside the mantel, said something in French to mistress, and when the parlour maid came, she received instructions to take the little stranger away, have him thoroughly washed, his head included, his clothes folded up and put away, and other ones put on him. "I wonder what the mystery is about him," said master. "Why should any one try to foist a child on us anonymously, when we are so ready to help any one? I can't understand it." "I understand it," said mistress softly, and as she spoke she stroked George's fair head. "It's some poor creature who cannot provide for her child. She looks at our child with envious eyes. She thinks if she gives up her boy, we may do for him what Stanna has done for Syria." "Do you think that is the explanation?" said master. "But in Stanna's case everything was open and above board. I don't like this mystery, and I don't care to be dictated to with regard to the size of my family." "Let's find out the mother," said mistress. "It will probably be an easy matter." It wasn't an easy matter. Master put several detectives on the case, but the affair had been arranged by some unknown person with infinite skill, and they could not find out one thing about it. No one thought of appealing to me, though I had guessed immediately where the boy came from. Master, of course, thought of King Harry, but he was useless, for the child's tracks led right to the station, and the station meant New York City, and the hound would be of no use there. He had found the lost child in the country that he had been searching for when Sir Edward was missing, but a city with its multitude of tracks bewilders any bloodhound. The evening the child arrived, there had been about him a strong smell of a place I did not know, but also a faint suggestion of a place I did know, especially about his face, his hands, and the piece of paper he carried, and that place was the Bluebird Laundry. We dogs have every person, every locality listed in our world of smell. I had been to the laundry several times with my master, and the mingled odor of soapsuds, cooking, and the personal scent of the women there could not be mistaken by me. These detectives that master employed had no highly developed sense of smell. They were following trails suggested by their eyes and ears. Master was a long time figuring out my interest in the child, but finally it dawned upon him. I was always sniffing about the little stranger, for I wanted to help my dear mistress. She was such a good mother, and I hated to see her troubled. Her loving heart, so warm toward all mothers since she had had a child of her own, had prompted her to take young Montmorency right into her own nursery, but she did not enjoy doing so. One day when I was following her about the house, she came suddenly into the nursery and stopped short, gazing at the two children. There stood Montmorency, dressed in a dainty suit of pale blue, uttering a succession of queer, uncouth sounds which all seemed to begin with G, and teaching a vulgar little trick to her beloved George. The trick wasn't very bad, but George was so much cleverer than Montmorency that he added some details of his own that made me grin, but which brought a frown to her face. She caught George to her and sat staring at the little stranger. After a while Master strolled into the nursery. "That child belongs most decidedly to a different stratum in society," she exclaimed, "a much lower one." And she told him about the trick, which was a spitting one. "I believe you're right, Claudia," said Master thoughtfully, and he too stared and stared at young Montmorency, who was polishing off his funny little nose on his clean tunic. I ran toward Master and pushed my paw against his knee, a habit I have when I wish to attract his attention, or have a conversation with him. Of course this is not good manners for a well-trained dog. All dogs should keep their paws on the ground where they belong. But I was allowed this liberty by my kind master, and I took care never to abuse it. "By Jupiter!" he cried, which is the nearest he ever comes to a swear word. "I believe Boy has nosed out something about that child, Claudia. Please keep George quiet for a few minutes." Master fixed a steady gaze on me, and I stared full into his eyes. We were concentrating. "Boy," he said at last, "that child comes from New York, doesn't he?" I barked once, sharp and clear. "You smell a New York smell on him?" said Master. I barked twice. "Yes, sir," that meant. "I certainly do." "Riverside Drive smell?" asked Master. I looked disappointed and turned my head away. "Smell of Ellen's home?" pursued Master. No, this child had never been near Ellen, so I said nothing. "No uptown suggestion?" said Master. "Downtown, then." I was tremendously excited. I was leading him on. I barked wildly and danced around the room. "Getting warmer," said Master, who was becoming excited too. "Now, where have we been downtown together? In my office, Boy?" No, no, he was on the wrong track, and my face fell. "No office clue," he went on. "French café, then. Perhaps a waiter's child." "Wrong, wrong," and I said nothing. "The settlement house? Or the day nursery?" No, no, poor Master. Why could he not guess? He mentioned ever so many places downtown that we had visited together, and he was so slow at getting to the right spot that I, in despair, lay down on the floor, put my nose between my paws, and pretended to go to sleep. "He finds you very stupid, my poor Rudolph," said Mistress slyly. She loves to tease him occasionally, and she was following his questions and my answers with intense interest. "Let me make a suggestion," she said at last. "There is one place you never used to visit, but that you go to quite frequently now. Is it the Bluebird Laundry, Boy?" I barked, I screamed with excitement, I ran to her and licked her slippers and her hands. Oh, the clever woman! "By Jupiter!" said Master again. "This looks like magic. Now let us find the woman. Is it Perky Moll, Boy?" The matron in the laundry is a lady who is the widow of a former friend of the Grantons. She is full of fun, and has nicknames for the girls which she uses sometimes with Master, but which the girls themselves never hear. Well, it wasn't Perky Moll, and my excitement passed away, and I looked cast down. "Is it Jumping Jenny? Troublesome Doll? Mrs. Willy-nilly?" And on Master went over a long list. At last he had mentioned every woman in the laundry except the right one. And just here I may wander long enough to say that the dreadful woman with the child that we met one night on Riverside Drive was not there. She had died, and her child was in the country with a farmer's wife. Now at this point, when Master was puzzled, my clever mistress interposed again. She had a scent as keen as old King Harry's about matters where women and children were concerned. "Is it old Jane, the cook, Boy?" she asked softly. Now I was in ecstasy. I couldn't stop to lick anyone. I yelled with glee and tore round and round the nursery. "Upon my word," said Master slowly, when at last I pulled up, "Boy has jumped at the Jane suggestion. But she is too old to have a child. Maybe it's her grandchild." Mistress didn't say anything, and he went on affectionately, "My clever little dog, my clever brother dog, you are worth your weight in gold." This made me feel and act foolish and modest, and I calmed down and went to lie at his feet. "Old Jane," he repeated soberly. "Poor old Jane. What's the matter, Claudia?" Mistress was crying softly, but at his question she flared up. "Can't you see?" she said wildly. "Oh, can't you see, you obtuse man? That nightmare of a woman, she has no teeth, her eyes are all red, she looks clean, but so thin and starved." "She is a cook," said master. "She has nearly killed herself working for her child," said mistress. "I remember the dreadful hunger in her eyes one day when you took me to the laundry. She stared at me in the kitchen, she slipped upstairs and watched me from a doorway. She tore the child from her arms to give me to bring up. Oh, poor soul, and cruel, cruel society to so wound a mother heart." "We pay her well," said master. "But the money has gone to her child. She has been boarding it somewhere. Oh, Rudolph, go buy her some teeth." Mistress laughed and cried in the same breath, and finally she had to go and lie down. She kept on chattering hysterically about the woman who went without teeth to buy clothes for her child, until master became quite anxious. "You are making a mountain out of a molehill, Claudia," he said. "I cannot think that your suspicions are correct." "They're not suspicions," she said excitedly. "They're verities. Go to town. You'll see." Master thought he was done with New York for the day, but after dinner he had to post off to the laundry, where he found that everything mistress had said was correct. Poor old Jane was not half as old as she looked. She acknowledged that no one in the laundry knew that she had a child, that she had been boarding him ever since he was a baby, that she wanted him to be brought up a gentleman, that she had sneaked him out to Pleasant River, taking infinite precautions not to be discovered, and that she had actually spent nearly every cent of her wages on this beloved child. I went to town with master, and I shall never forget the sight of that poor thin woman as she sat in the matron's office answering master's questions. Her indifference, almost stupidity about her own welfare, her quick mother wit and shrewdness about her child, excited my most intense admiration. When master finished questioning her, he said, "Jane, I have a plan to propose. I hope you will agree to it. You should have left here long ago, but we kept you because you begged to stay. Now you will remain in New York only long enough to get a set of teeth." Here he stopped and smiled a very pained sort of smile, and looked hastily from the nice plump matron whose big blue eyes were full of tears. "After you get your teeth," he went on, "you will come to Pleasant River. I have a cottage to let there. You shall have it, and Montmorency may live with you. Your skill in cooking will support you. I will see to that." Jane began to mope in a dull sort of way. She did not cry. Her red eyes looked as if she had shed all the tears she had to shed. She said she would rather his wife would keep Montmorency and she would stay in New York. "That I cannot consent to," said master, and he got up to show his decision was final. Jane wasn't a bit grateful. Her mania for her boy's advancement socially made her fight against coming to the country, and kick hard at living in the pretty cottage master fitted up for her. Master and mistress paid no attention to her tempers. They went on and coaxed and petted her, till finally she began to get her health back, and then she became more reasonable. All this happened a few months ago, and now she is the leading caterer of the countryside, and is a comfortable, decent mother, bringing up her idolized boy in a very sensible way. He goes to Mrs. Waverlee's school, and I think will make a very decent man. Jane never gushes to the two persons who have so befriended her, but I heard her one day tell the woman next door to her that she would walk over red-hot kitchen stoves if it would benefit Mr. and Mrs. Granton. I seldom hear any one thank master for anything he does, but it makes no difference to him. He just keeps on doing good, thanks or no thanks. I may say in closing Jane's story that she got the finest set of artificial teeth that New York could afford, and for a while the dentist had her wear things called plumpers, to make her thin cheeks stick out. Now I hear from Montmorency's dog, who was one of Weary Winnie's pups, that Jane threw the plumpers in the trash can, and we can all see that she is visibly better and has some color in her cheeks. The tailor's dog, Beauty Beagle, says that her master is getting sweet on Jane because she is such a good cook. The tailor is a cute little man, about as fat as a lead pencil, and not much to look at, but he has a good heart and would make a fine stepfather for the redoubtable Montmorency, who is learning to talk quite well. Beside that, He has true views of life. One evening when I was passing by Jane's cottage, I heard him say to her, "You ain't on the right track." I stopped to listen, for I am interested in Jane. "Yes, I be," she said. "I want my boy to be a good dresser." "It ain't the outside alone that counts, Jane," said the tailor. "It's the inside, too." "And you a tailor," she said contemptuously. The little tailor was pretty decided, and he went on. "You can make Montmorency a gentleman as well as Mr. Granton can." "Now tell me how," she said anxiously. "Learn him to be meek," said the tailor. "Learn him to act like a man. Learn him to be bossed, so he can boss, to treat very merciful any poor folk and dumb critters that are under him, to be clean inside and out, to get a first-class education, and to wear a tidy suit of clothes." Jane didn't say anything for a long time. Then she remarked, "That's like a picture of Mr. Granton. If my boy could be like him, I'd be suited." Chapter 25.